This episode of the Huddle Breakdown is brought to you in association with the One Football app, your one-stop shop for all your football goodness. The One Football app is the best football app on the market right now. You can get your fixtures, your results, live scores, transfer news, squad updates, everything that you need on the team that you support is available now in the One Football app. The One Football app, you can subscribe to the team you support, and all of the stuff that you need on that team is available all in the one spot, and it's all completely free as well. So download the One Football app now using the link in the description below. Not only are you supporting the channel, supporting the Huddle Breakdown, you're also getting a top-notch football app as well. So use the link in the description below to download the One Football app now. Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to skip the intro and get straight to it. We have a 9-0 victory to talk about, a 4-1 League Cup victory to talk about, the Derby match coming up this Saturday to talk about, and the small matter of Real Madrid in the Champions League first night for Celtic on Tuesday night to talk about as well. As well as that, it's transfer deadline day, and Celtic are signing a new centre defensive midfielder. So without further ado, Alan Morrison, Celtic by Numbers, and James are with me as always. It's a busy time to be a Celtic fan these days, guys. So where do we start? We'll start with the 9-0 win because, if anything, that's probably the easiest game to look at because you don't really have to analyze a game that Celtic won by 9-0 too much. But one person that I wanted to talk about in this game was Kyogo, because another hat-trick for him this season, and he is absolutely flying. He's off to a flyer. He's scored now 4 consecutive games, the opening goal for Celtic. And Alan, this one is sort of weird for us because Kyogo disappeared off the foot of the earth for a while last season, and Giakoumakis did such a good job in sort of filling his boots that we may have forgotten that Kyogo was, like, by far and away the best player in the league up until the point of his injury in the League Cup final last year. And it seems like we've got that player back at the start of the season.
He's certainly the most efficient in terms of, he makes all of his contributions count. Listen, 9-0, where do you start with that? I mean, okay, so let's get the negatives out of the way. You have to say Dundee United were an absolute shambles. I mean, they were ripped apart by Alkmaar because they played three forwards, none of whom can press, none of whom can defend, none of whom really were going to ever track back. That left a midfield that included Craig Sibbald, that I can honestly say I can run faster than Craig Sibbald. Levitt, who's a lovely footballer, but is never going to, be a number 6. And then Harkes, who probably is the closest they've got to a box-to-box midfielder, trying to sort of defend acres of space. So that was just a disaster. And then they compromised a little bit. So they dropped one of the forwards and they brought in an extra sort of midfielder, and they went 5 at the back. But then, so what they had then was they had 2 forwards who can't defend and didn't press. So immediately you're defending with eight players. Okay, so they're defending with 8 players. That's all they've got to defend with. The 3 of them in the middle are very, very compact. So they've completely surrounded the wings. Well, that's where Celtic want to get the ball, and they want to get their players one-on-one. That completely, of course, freed up as well the central midfielders, and basically we just played between the lines of the 5 players at the back with devastating effect. Now that's the sort of negative, but turning to Celtic then. So what you're seeing here again is the culmination of a team that is becoming very comfortable in its skin, playing the way its manager wants them to play. Who the players are becoming very used to each other. The little observation that my eldest lad made, who's actually far more observant about football in real time than I am. I'm genuinely just watching it as a fan, and he keeps telling me things that I think, yeah, I don't really notice that, to be honest. And the thing that he noticed that I thought was really interesting was he said they're absolutely firing the ball at each other. They're pinging the ball at each other so fast. And he goes, and we discussed it a bit, and I sort of agreed that comes down to trust. It comes down to trust and understanding. You trust your teammate to receive the ball. You trust your teammate that's going to control it, and you trust that they're going to do the right thing with it. And if you watch the game back, there are a number of occasions where Dundee United players think they're going to be able to intercept it, and they don't. Because we zipped it about with such pace. There was no tentativeness. There was no lack of confidence. There was a belief in each other and a belief in what they were trying to do. And that is a proper team. And it almost doesn't matter what level you play with. If you've got that, then you've got something quite special. And I think that's what we're seeing. So, yes, accepting Dundee United were an absolute disaster and were set up completely wrong. But the way that Celtic are playing now is with a degree of understanding and trust and belief in themselves that is quite special to watch.
Yeah, just on that observation from your son, I remember I was chatting to Matt Doherty, who plays for Tottenham, Irish player, plays right back. He played for Wolves previously. And we're just chatting about the Wolves team in general and what it was like and how good the likes of Ruben Neves was and João Moutinho. And he said the one thing about João Moutinho was he would absolutely blast the ball at you. And it was up to you to take a good touch or not take a good touch. And if you didn't take a good touch, then you weren't good enough to get the ball off João Moutinho. So it's kind of the same as that, what you're saying, the trust that every player has for every player to be almost pitch perfect with each pass, with each touch. Everything needs to be in sync. And I guess that's what is lost in a lot of analysis is that, Celtic scored 9 goals, so therefore they're just brilliant. Whereas like it takes a lot of time and effort in the background to make a team tick as much. And it sort of brings me into the second point I wanted to make on this game, James, because we're going to talk further about the League Cup and about the games to come. And that is, Celtic have always been a dominant team. And I made this point on Twitter as well. Celtic have been a dominant team always in the Scottish League. Since the moment they came in, they've been a dominant team. And in the last 10 years, 15 years, they've been the dominant team. But I can't remember in memory Celtic being this dominant and this good at the same time. I can't remember them being this stylish and being as effective. And it's just scary how good they are at the minute. And I know we're only 5 games into the season, but God, they're really ticking at the minute.
Yeah, so I think I can't even remember if it was online when we were recording or offline when Alan and I were chatting. But you know, I know on the show we've been discussing the kind of calamitous setup for the rest of the league, given where Celtic and Rangers are in the Champions League, the financial resources and 5 sub rule. And I think Alan and I actually discussed, again, I don't remember if it was on the show or not, that there's a pretty decent chance of the scenario where we score a record amount of goals this season. And I think a lot of that has to do, and that would be a big number, obviously. But a lot of that has to do with the style of play that Ange deploys, how good of a coach he is, and really capitalizing on some of the inherent gaps that are there because of the disparity in resources. So I think a lot of that's structural because of how good Ange is and the advantages we have. And just, you know, as we've talked about, as you stretch out that gap in quality of chances, the probabilities of dropping points become, you know, very, very low. And you're going to get the kind of results that we got on the weekend. Actually, I looked through. Now, again, this only dates back to 18-19, so don't have StatsBomb data back to the Invincible season, but that was the second highest XG based off StatsBomb's model. The highest since 18-19 was last season in the 6-0 against Dundee, which wasn't a team that quit. They were just a really bad team. So I think Dundee United's a better team, but obviously with what's going on there in the last few weeks has some very specific issues around player effort and that kind of thing, downing tools. So I mean that's the kind of thing I think we're going to get more of these 5-0, 6-0, 7-0, just because it's so skewed now. And I think part of what limited that last season, quite frankly, were the injuries and the lack of squad depth. And you know, our players, you know, as you guys would say, blowing out their arse. Is that how you would say it, Alan? So, you know, we're with the depth that we've got now, raising the floor because of that. You know, there's just going to be a lot of teams domestically that get completely hammered, and maybe not as bad as that, but you know, more on a line with that would not be surprising.
Yeah, and the depth again was shown last night in Celtic's 4-1 win against Ross County in the League Cup, a game that Celtic made a whole host of changes, and somehow Callum McGregor has still not gotten a rest. But Celtic basically played their second team in this game. They had Giakoumakis up front. Abada came in to start the game. Maida was in. We saw a glimpse of Haksabanovic, the new signing, who's come in from Rubin Kazan, another Rubin Kazan player soon to follow him. And now shortly, hopefully before the end of the transfer window, it seems to be pretty much done at this point. Celtic are really at the point where they're going to announce it. We'll talk about Oliver Abildgaard later on in the show. But in terms of the team that started, you had Jens, you had Stephen Welsh, who I actually thought was quite interesting in the way that he played. You had a couple of changes in midfield with Aaron Moy playing as the number 6. And I think that's where we should start with this analysis in terms of the 4-1 win. Aaron Moy came in. We all thought he wasn't probably going to be fit enough at that point. I think he still probably isn't completely up to speed with what the Ange system requires in terms of his pace and fitness levels. But, Alan, we're seeing a role here that I mentioned might be a role for him in this team, and that is almost the quarterback role. He was in line with our centre-backs quite often during the game last night, and just basically playing balls over the top of defenses. That's essentially his role, is controlling the pace of the game, controlling where the ball goes, and controlling how fast Celtic play. And I thought he did it really, really well last night.
He did. So I was doing the match coverage for Axom last night, and I said on the pre-game, I said, I'm looking for 2 things from Moy. One is, does his passing range, is his passing range going to become a little bit more expansive, and does it hold up in a game where the opposition are fresh, they're going to be pressing hard, they're going to be closing them down, etc. And then second is, what's he going to be like on transition? What's his defensive coverage going to be like? Now, if you look at his passing, first of all, I think you're right. I mean, he didn't dominate the ball, but he certainly got on the ball more than anybody else. I think I've not got the full game stats yet, but he was probably up there in terms of having as much of the ball as probably the centre backs. I think he's up to 54 passes, 90% complete. I've still got a few minutes of the game to capture. Not many pack passes, actually, only sort of 3 so far. So still a little bit conservative. But what really impressed me, actually, was more the defensive side. He's actually at 100% success rate on defensive actions. And his reading of and positioning of reading of the game, and therefore his positioning play, against that level of opposition, it seems to me he can adequately compensate for his lack of physique, lack of pace, by being a very intelligent footballer in terms of what positions he takes up. He was very rarely in front of the ball, very rarely. So even on the rare transition or the rare turnover, he's only been packed. I think it was 7 times compared to, say, 17 for Turnbull, who pushed up, played more as a 10, and then 11 for McGregor, who was more of a sort of box to box on that game. So he didn't find himself wrong side of the ball an awful lot. So I still agree with you. I don't think he's quite there yet in terms of full fitness, but this is someone who's going to offer an element of solidity to that midfield and a bit of safety almost. So in that regard, it's probably a good match. But the other thing is, I think there's a load more to come from him in terms of his passing range. I mean, we've seen glimpses of it, but I think it's only been glimpses. I think, at Celtic Park, where there's more space, I think we'll see a more expansive game from him, which will be quite exciting to see, I think.
Yeah, I think we're seeing one signature pass in particular. He played one over the top. It's like a looping pass that goes way, way up in the air and then drops down over the top of the defense. He did it in the Dundee United game as well. I think it was Abada's hat-trick goal, I think might have led to that. It was over the top of Jota. He crossed it over to Abada. And then he did it again last night. It didn't come to anything. I think it came to a Giakoumakis chance where he put wide. But that's sort of what the range that we're looking at, what he's going to be playing. And I thought his positioning was interesting as well. I know you sort of alluded to it there, that he wasn't really in front of the ball much. If you watch how high Celtic were playing, he was almost a third defender. He was in the center between Welsh and Jens. And I think that's somewhere that you can see him thriving against teams like Ross County and domestically, James. I think Aaron Moy is going to grow into a role that's going to be quite important. And it's one that Ange Postecoglou said after the game about the squad depth and being able to use it, that he feels a lot more comfortable being able to rotate 5, 6, 7 different positions for these midweek games now, because he's got the players that he trusts to go in there now.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously with my bias, I like your description of him as a quarterback, and I've used that analogy before, particularly when you're playing, and with just the one defensive midfielder central. That was one of my concerns in the past when we haven't had an element of creativity there, or really, and we'll get into the discussion towards the end of the show on the new signing, but. Having somebody in that central role to be able to spray the ball and to do it adeptly, I think there's a lot of value to that. And particularly relative to these kinds of opponents where there's not a whole lot of risk in defensive transitions. Again, we saw that with Ross County. You could see phases of play where a better team could have done more damage, that they kind of get snuffed out because they, fumble the ball or make a bad decision, that kind of thing. So, on a relative weighting, from, again, we always talk about this idea of optimization. Probably the biggest risk that we face in these kind of games is just one of those games where they bunker and you can't score, right? And somehow they get a set piece and all of a sudden it's a 1-1 game, or, God help us, we lose a 1-0 in that kind of game, where we shoot 25 times and don't score. You get those kind of games. And I think on balance, Moy in that kind of role is very valuable, probably in helping create chances and be able to break down bunkered sides because of his range of passing, because of his vision, because he can do those kind of, really proactive defensive actions where he recaptures the ball and catches the other side in transition, because he's good at reading the game. And, the athletic level of the opponent isn't enough to really hurt where the deficiencies come in. So yeah, and it's fun to watch. I mean, I'm biased. Like I just, my personal bias, not even an analytical thing, but I just like watching guys like him be able to pass the way he does. I mean, I just find that a more appealing form of the game. So yeah, big fan of watching him.
I'm not comparing myself to him, but I do like watching players who were previously a little more attacking fall back deeper as they get older in age, as I am doing currently in my 27. As I reach 27 into my 28s, I should be going into my peak, but I'm regressing back to the center defensive midfield role when I'm a bit more comfortable. So
might be that Brunello you're drinking. You're hitting the sauce too much, Enda.
Well, that's it. Marco is actually asking in the comments what I'm asking. It is a Côte de Rosaline. It's from Antibes, and it's vintage 2020. It was €3.20, I think.
Brilliant.
Down in the
Brilliant.
shop. So yeah, it's
it's not
one of the expensive.
No prawn sandwiches on the Huddle Breakdown.
No, absolutely not. Keeping it real. So look, there's two more things that I want to talk about in this 4-1 game just before we move on. Because there is a lot to talk about. The first one, really quickly, Stephen Welsh came in at centre back. Alan, I'm throwing this to you in particular because I know you are a Cameron Carter-Vickers fan after being a Matt O'Reilly fan. Stephen Welsh did quite a lot of what Cameron Carter-Vickers does in terms of his progressing the ball last night. I noticed there's starting to be a few similarities in the way that he carries the ball into midfield before releasing. Is that purposeful?
It is. I think Celtic gave them a different problem to solve because Ross County. I mean, listen, I thought they were quite impressive in some respects. I mean, you certainly saw what you did see is about 100% more effort, and just they were trying to get close to Celtic as best they could. They were trying to make contact whenever Celtic got the ball as much as they possibly could, and they were trying their best to make it as difficult as they can. Listen, a team of Ross County's size, what are you going to do to combat Celtic? Right, you're going to be as compact as you can be. You're going to leave as few spaces as you can be. You're going to maximize any. You're going to waste time. You're going to not give the ball back when it goes out of play. You're going to slow things down. You're going to frustrate. You're going to give away niggly fouls. Whenever you get a chance, you're going to launch the ball into the box, right? And that's exactly what they did. And no harm to them. It makes perfect sense. It's a perfectly sensible way for a team their resources to deploy against Celtic. Absolutely. And the goal was like a classic Sunday League goal, just like launching a huge ball into the mixer, and the big 6'5" striker who, in all other respects, can't play football, just needs to get ahead on it, and which isn't a skill that takes a lot of money to buy. Stephen Welsh, I don't think helped in that regard. I mean, he was losing headers, to White, the same as even Jens lost. Actually, Jens didn't lose any, but for some reason, obviously White attached himself to Welsh, and then Starfelt, who he's got previous for bullying around, and did so again successfully for the goal. So Welsh has got some of the same weaknesses as Starfelt in terms of his aerial abilities. Is in Scotland against big strikers in aerial battles. He's not particularly effective. Now, that isn't the end of the world, because again, okay, so you lose that first contact, then you've got someone like Carter Vickers who's very good in terms of anticipation. You've got quick fullbacks around you to cover. So it's not the end of the world, but it will lead to some issues in games, as James said, where you can lose. I mean, both goals Celtic conceded this season have been headers in the box from set plays, both against Ross County. So, I think Ange almost accepts that weakness, and Welsh, as I say, doesn't really help in that regard. We've talked about in the past Welsh's passing being good. It was decent again yesterday. Sort of 7 pack passes, was just actually a couple less than Bernabei, who surprised me with his progressive passing. But the thing that stood out, as you said, was his carrying the ball, which he did. He did 10 times actually. Either taking it past people or just making yards. So that's a quite phenomenal number of carries for a defensive player. But again, it's decision making. The centre backs are clearly being told, because if we've seen in different games, I don't think it's particularly a Stephen Welsh thing. I think it's the centre backs are told, if there's space in front of you, take the space. To cause disruption, cause the other team to make a decision. Do they go and close you down and then leave a more talented footballer, in which case you give the ball to them, or do they all back off, in which case you take the space and push everyone up the pitch? And I don't think it's Welsh that's been told to do that. Jens did it in one game. Carter Vickers did it in one game. Starfelt's been known to do it, and in other games they've not done it. So it's a case of it's a decision making, and they have the authority and the mandate to make that decision if they think it's the best thing for the team.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more goals from our centre backs this year. Karl Starfelt already has 2, amazingly. His second one was actually an absolutely thunderous header. Brilliant to see him actually scoring a good header, because previously we've seen him sort of faff at a few things, but that was a good goal. I think we're actually, if you played Aaron Moy at centre back in the game, maybe against, let's say, Dundee United, the amount of times that Celtic centre backs have found themselves in the box and just kind of got a nosebleed in the same way that you would expect centre back. I'd love to see. I don't know if you don't have the XG for them, do you? The centre backs.
Oh, in total?
No, just in the previous games.
In that game. In that game. So Welsh was his total scoring contribution was 0.08. So that's expected goals and assists. Jens was 0. Starfelt was 0. So they didn't actually, create anything as such. But it's not the point. It's about creating uncertainty in the opposition and forcing them to leave their sort of compact shape. Really, that's really the main benefit of it.
Mm-hmm. Just to finish off in this game, then, you mentioned him already in that chat with Stephen Welsh, and that's Alexandro Burnaby, who came in as the starter in left back. And he did some good things, he did some bad things. It was his first start for Celtic. I think he was a bit wasteful at times in the positions that he's at. We spoke about maybe his normal everyday passing might have been a bit loose, and it was. But I felt his final product, James, was a bit hit or miss last night. And look, granted, we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt here that it was his first real test as the starting Celtic left back. But good or bad, how would you weigh it? Is it more good than bad that he did against Ross County?
Yeah, I think he basically looked like what his profile suggested he was when we talked about him when he was signed, meaning that he's got some developing to do. Probably would take him some time to get comfortable with, our patterns of play, because it seems to be fairly structured as far as the movement and the significant off the ball movement, who's going to be where and build up and that kind of thing. And it just takes a little while for a brain to get that to be intuitive. And, he's a fairly aggressive player. Saw his athleticism. I think that's clear. He's got the pace that's, kind of like what we talked about, more of a European level pace that he has some speed to burn, so to speak. And when he gets into the final third, he has the ability to create chances. He has the ability. It's about consistency. And to your point, some of his deliveries I thought were excellent. So he's really got that ability. It's a question of getting consistency, and so all of the raw materials appear to be there. It's a matter of him growing into the role, and I think that's, given his age and his pedigree, where he's coming from, I think it's only natural that that's going to take some time. It's not like we're buying a fairly polished player from PSG, like an Edouard or somebody like that. Where he was coming from, there's some more development to be done. So I found it encouraging. And because you've got Greg Taylor there, for the most part, he can take his time and ramping up, and hopefully, later this season and next season more so, he'll maybe end up being the starter and realizing some of that athleticism.
Might even be better than Liam Scales. Who knows?
No, that's impossible.
So Enda, sorry to cut across, some stats from him that actually surprised me, because when I was watching the game, I allowed my bias to be coloured by the fact that he just gives the ball away. Sometimes we just think it's a 5-yard pass, man. All you have to do is roll it 5 yards, and it's so frustrating. But again, this is why I do what I do, because that completely colours your judgment, and you miss all the other stuff. Nobody won more challenges than him. Nobody recovered the ball more, in terms of the new stat that I'm collecting, pack recovery. So when you recover the ball and you therefore put a lot of the opposition out of the game. Nobody won the ball back in the defensive third more. Nobody won possession back overall more, and he's got the highest packing score in the team, and had the most pack passes at 9. So it's a bit like Abada. He does a lot of brilliant things, and then there's some absolute rubbish in there. They just think, what are you doing? That wasn't difficult. Why did you do that? And he's young. They're both young, and I think they're both going to, take a bit of time to settle. But as James says, I think all the raw materials there. What I particularly like is he pops up in really interesting positions on the field. Suddenly he's an inside left forward, and he's pressing, and it's a good decision because he causes chaos. His support plays excellent. His speed, he's one of these that's got a low center of gravity, and it seems like he's got good balance. And I love good balance in a player. So I think there's a lot, and his aggression, it's just his innate aggression and willingness to win the ball back. And if you've got aggression, you've got speed, and you've got good balance, you're going to be very effective at pressing. You're going to be very effective at counter pressing. You're going to be very effective in the challenge. So there's a lot of rough edges there, but I think there's a lot of raw materials that are really encouraging as well.
Yeah, look, he's an Argentine defender. I'd send him to the doctor if he didn't have any aggression. It's just innately built into them. But I was actually just one final point on him. I was going to ask about his positioning, because he did pop up in very unusual positions. Like there was one point where he was practically playing right wing for a while, just when Celtic were attacking. Is that something that Ange's going to like or dislike? Because I couldn't tell whether that was on purpose or if he's just getting used to the system.
It's in his I mean, if you've watched anything of him, and I've only watched like YouTube highlights, that was the first thing that I noticed about him. So if you didn't know that when you were buying him, then you weren't paying attention. So I suspect he knows that's part of his game, and I suspect he'll encourage it. Rolston popped up all over the place as well last night. By the way, Rolston, just a quick one on him. He's lost some kilos, right? And he was demonstrably quicker over the ground because of it. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
And we've
sorry,
talked
go ahead,
about
James.
we've talked about the fluidity of how we're playing. That's a little bit different this season with all of the overloads and the interchanging, and you know, so I actually wouldn't be surprised if that's not only coordinated, meaning that they knew what he was getting, but that's part of the quote unquote plan, meaning that getting players that fit into this more dynamic playing style. But you also saw, and I noticed this when I looked at him in some of his experience in Argentina, is positionally he can not have the instincts to cover. I mean, he got caught out a couple of times, balls over the head, and that becomes an issue when you're playing this more fluid dynamic style. So again, it's again with the recent off the pitch issue as well, he's got some maturing to do. He's got some some stuff to do in between the ears, in figuring some of this stuff out. And again, he's 20. I think he's 21. That's not all that unusual. So it'll get better, I think. That's the optimistic view. And it's so early. I mean, he's only in 3 months basically. So there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, if you're comparing it to drivers, Greg Taylor's probably the 40-year-old husband of 3 with 2 kids who is a experienced, calm, collective, does everything correct, hands at 10 and 2, and then Bernabé is the 21-year-old who just got his license and has a muffler on the back of his exhaust. It just depends what kind of journey you're looking for when you're picking the 2 of them for left back.
Don't think I didn't know you said 40 something there and not 50 something. I know who's getting targeted here.
Let's not go there.
There's no ages discussed on this podcast. Don't worry. All right, let's move on real quickly to the derby match. First derby of the season. Celtic go into it in absolutely flying form. Probably the first derby in I don't know how long the Celtic have been able to entirely change their team by Callum McGregor playing in midfield beforehand, but still going in with absolute sheer confidence that they can get the job done. I remember a derby match last year, Alan, where you were almost 95% certain that Celtic were going to win it. Is your confidence in the same level? For me, look, as all right as Rangers results have been this season, they have been fine. I've watched a couple of games. They're not a nice team to watch. They're I'm not convinced by them at all.
No, but what you're going to see is again a contrast. So Ange is a system manager. He's got a system he wants to play, and he finds the resources to make that and optimize it. Okay, whereas Van Bronckhorst he will adapt to the opposition, and we saw what worked for them last season in the Scottish Cup semi-final and in the 1-1 game. And they've done it as well. The blueprint is, especially home and away performances in Europe, where they will try and press as high as they can and as aggressively as they can. What they will believe is that they have physical superiority over Celtic, that they can outmuscle. They'll try and turn the game into an arm wrestle. We all know in Scotland that, the game on the weekend will be about, the referee's doing great because he's letting the game flow. As in, there's going to be a lot of challenges going in, a lot of contact that just gets let go. That will be disruptive. They'll slow the game down wherever possible, and they'll try and optimize on set plays. That's going to be the game plan, and they've got a good squad of players to play in that way. And it is a sensible way to play against this Celtic team because. We haven't got the best passers of the ball out from the back. We have got a relatively small team physically. We haven't got a team of bruisers, and they're particularly muscly. So we just have to do plan A as well as we can, and play through that press, play through the challenges, and be brave. The evidence is that we're in fine form, and the Celtic will go into it believing that they can play through it. I think they'll know what to expect in that regard. I'm not expecting any great surprises in lineup or what have you. It will be, the message will be, we play the way we play, and we do it as well as we can.
Transfer deadline day is going to impact it as well, potentially, because it looks like Glenn Kamara could be out the door to Nice, depending on whether Nice can get another bid in time to get that transfer over the line. So I think Glenn Kamara is a decent enough player who has had good sort of a good impact against Celtic in a certain number of games. James, what are you expecting from the other side in this game? How are they going to, as Alan says, disrupt the Celtic players, bar the defensive side of things? How are they going to damage Celtic if they can?
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting because I agree with Alan adeptly highlighted at the time and then just revisited some of the things that they did to make the last couple of games last season far more difficult for Celtic, and some of that walked out the door in Bassey, in Aribo, so that the level of athleticism that they brought to some of the man marking that they were doing, some of the pressing, that's not easy to replace. And, Barisic is not Bassey at left back relative to, or even at center back. Sands isn't Bassey as a center back trying to man mark like he had done on Rogic, or if they were going to do it against O'Reilly, or right. So there how much a Lawrence translates versus an Aribo in that kind of pressing role. To your point, I think Kamara would be closer if he were around and played. So I think selection is going to be interesting, how they go about doing it. Are they actually going to follow the same kind of script with players who maybe aren't quite as athletic from a speed perspective in particular? I think, I think that they're probably a little weaker overall from where they were at the end of last season would be kind of my assessment. And not to say that they, again, single game variance, that kind of thing. The big wild card for me is Tillman. I've been impressed with him. He seems to have the quality to, have those kind of magic moments. And in these kind of big games, those are the things that can be the difference between a draw and a loss, or, potentially getting 3 points. So, the other thing is that I think that they, I think the move, if they're going to continue to play Sands at center back, I know him a little bit just because him being an American and playing for the national team and just following a little bit in the MLS, he's played a lot in midfield as well. And so he's got that on the ball skill that's a positive in a sense, playing as a ball playing center back, but he's also positionally, you can get caught out at times. And, we saw that with the controversial non-call, where he could have had a straight red or a second yellow. So he, with him and Goldson, I think we do have the ability to create real headaches for them and chances with some of the running in behind that you would expect Kyogo to make, and maybe Maeda maybe Abada. Again, selection is going to be interesting on our side. So that would be another area. Now that's somewhat muted because McLaughlin's a lot better coming off the line than McGregor would be, and it looks like he's been anchored as the number one. Not that he's elite in that sweeping role, but it's hard to get much worse than McGregor was at 40 years old in that role. So, but yeah, I think that's a real positive for us in our ability to maybe create some of those chances as they press higher, as they play more of a high line. I think we can, counter and potentially create some real headaches.
It's almost like we've scripted the show, because the Kyogo movement in behind was actually my next protocol on this. But El Bronco's probably not going to play in this game. Thank God El Bronco's not going to play, because he's the player that has done most damage. He's the player that's done most damage to Celtic over the last couple of years. But it'll be interesting to see how Kolak gets on, because he has started to fire a little bit for them up front. So we'll wait and see what they do. But what about Celtic here, Alan? I think you liked the video. I certainly watched it on Twitter. Was the thread about how Kyogo is currently exploiting the new interpretation of the offside trap. Is that something that we can expect to see here, given how high Rangers actually do play?
Yeah, we can expect to see lots of offside decisions, I suspect. But I was just having a little chuckle to myself when James was talking about the players that have walked out the door, and I thought, the most influential one in terms of the Scottish Cup semi-final that's walked out the door is Bobby Madden. Because that's the only game. That's the only game. It is the only game that I've actually felt moved to ask the Yorkshire Whistler to say, listen, and this is a big ask, right? Because this is your time, right? But can you just watch the whole match? Just tell me what you think. I'm not going to just watch the match, and just, if you want, just do a little report. Just tell me what you think. I mean, he was flabbergasted, and this guy, he always tries to see it from the referee's perspective, and he was flabbergasted by Madden's performance in that Scottish Cup semi-final. Absolutely flabbergasted.
The Sands challenge that James referenced there, like that has me further convinced that there's no conspiracy, because that's too obvious. It's just the referees are just so fucking bad. Like, it's just incredible. It's incredible how bad they're.
Yeah, but it would be if not for the fact that had he sent him off, he would have been banned for this game, right? And it's an inexplicable, and I mean that literally. It's inexplicable, and therefore, what is the only rational explanation? Otherwise, because it's not possible that you missed it. It's not possible to misinterpret it, because it was so obvious. But anyway, listen. In terms of coming back to the question that you asked, sorry, just one more thing on them before I come back to Kyogo is that, and this is a really old school kind of opinion I'm going to give you here, which is that one thing I do think holds true is that if you've never played this game before, it's a bit of a shock to the system. And they're going to have a stack of new players playing in this game that have never played at Celtic Park, never played in this game before. And I'm not saying that's a game changer, but it's certainly a factor. Whereas I suspect all of the Celtic first starting 11 have been blooded in this fixture in that regard. So I think that's something else to bear in mind. Lawrence in particular can be very rash, so watch out for that. He can be really, really feisty. So if he gets drawn into anything, then that's one to look out for. I think Nick Walsh in general is one of the better referees, actually. So I'm kind of hopeful we'll get a fair crack at it. But yeah, coming back to Kyogo, yeah, I mean, it was really highlighted in the Dundee United game, the way that he's exploiting the sort of first phase, second phase laws around offside to really cause confusion, because you don't want to disrupt your defensive line. You know that he's there, and then you know that he's so quick and so nimble that if there is a second phase, you're probably not going to get back to catch him. So what do? Do you drop back? Do you disrupt that line and therefore create even more space and different angles? It's a real conundrum, and it's something which he does very intelligently, because it's a question of timing. It's pretty high end to time your movement with that precision, but also to run and to make your run to the right place as well, to not lose the advantage that you've gained by having that a couple of yards ahead of the defenders. So yeah, absolutely brilliant, and just again another example of an intelligent footballer. But again, the team are playing effectively because the players are now used to what's going on. They understand the patterns, and they know what's going. It's not always going to be perfect. We saw last night balls coming to the box, Giakoumakis falling over, Bernabei giving passes to people that run off in the other direction. You're going to get that against Dundee United. A lot of it worked perfectly. The first time passing, very aggressive passing, the movement was read, and people responded accordingly. But we're going to see more of that cohesion, as the season goes on. I loved the interview that Postecoglou gave with the Open Goal podcast, and what I thought was very revealing was when he talked about that he felt that maybe in the first 5 weeks of the season, where they've only had one game a week, he's felt that they've maybe left probably too much on the training ground, and that maybe some of the performances on a Saturday have been a little bit lacking in energy, such as the intensity of the training. But he said, the reason that we've done that is to be ready for the Champions League games. So I think we're going to see, and we saw it against Dundee United, because I think we played really well in all the league games. And if you look at the underlying data, there was a huge level of consistency, and there was a huge level of variance removal in terms of the difference between relative XGs, and we did more than enough to win every game. I think we're going to go up a notch again, because I think the focus will be on the Saturday now, not the training during the week, as we move into this rotation of Champions League, Champions League.
So finally, your favorite part of the show is back, and that's the predictions side of things. So, are Celtic going to win? I want to ask for a scoreline. Are Celtic going to win this?
I think we should. I'm confident. I wouldn't say we need to, but the next week I think is going to be really important, because all the things that Alan has said I agree with, but the opposition that we've faced so far doesn't really have any of the ammunition to be able to cause us problems in the areas that we are kind of inherently vulnerable. So I want to see what happens Saturday, us playing out from the back. That's a key thing, meaning that, kind of in that mid block where the man marking, that I think they're probably a notch lower than they had been last season. I think they're high press if they commit to it. Kolak's an upgrade, particularly on effort relative to Morelos. And they do have, let's not pretend that they have not been successful in Europe competing at this level. So they've got an ability to cause real problems for teams. And if we're not on our game in building up from the back, and we haven't really done a whole lot to address that issue, that's where I would have concern. Mistakes, misplaced pass, like Alan said, that they're going to be far better equipped to cause us problems in that regard. So that's really what I want to see. I'm confident, meaning that I think we're going to give them problems big time on in attack. And so I think we're going to be able to score. Mike, what I really want to see is if we're able to prevent them from causing us enough problems that it's, like a 3-2 kind of win, which would be more nerve-wracking than if it's a more controlled performance.
Alan?
Yep, that's all fair. So I think if they do lose Kamara, and Kamara doesn't seem to be one that Van Bronckhorst seemed to favour anyway, oddly, although he was very effective in Europe as a sort of more advanced player leading that press, and Aribo was excellent at that. Both of them I thought were excellent off the ball, and very good, nice tidy passers, and good at progressing the ball as well. Not so much a threat in the final third maybe, but very good at breaking up play and linking play. So I think they'll both be huge losses in terms of playing the way that I described. I don't think even Tillman or certainly not Lawrence are a patch on those two in terms of playing in that way. And if they're going to play Jack and Lundstrom, then you'd like to think they'll have very uncomfortable afternoons chasing back a lot. I mean, if Lundstrom's refereed properly, then we should be okay with him in that sense. And it's really going to come down to giving away daft free kicks out wide, allowing Barisic and Tavernier, who've both got excellent delivery, to get balls into the box is going to be the main danger, I would say. So I'm very hopeful. I've got great faith that the team is in a groove that is only going to improve. It will get disrupted. It won't be like it was on Saturday or anything like. It will be a more of a grind. We will have to dig in. But one of the things, again, a little insight that I thought was fascinating from Postecoglou in the podcast that I mentioned earlier was he said that, I think they asked him the question about, when you're on the touchline, you don't say anything. You don't seem to do anything. And he goes, I'm not going to talk to the fourth official. It's not going to change anything. It's pointless. All it's going to do is distract me from concentrating on the game and helping the players if I need to help them. So, and he said, as a team, we're not going to get involved with the opposition. Don't get involved with the referee. Don't get frustrated at things, because it just distracts from your concentration and from the job you've got to do. If you've got a team that is wanting to get every restart done quickly, and not just for the sake of it, because there's already a pattern to what that restart is going to look like, who's going to run where, etc., then you're not going to start arguing with the referee or getting involved with one of the opposition and so forth, because you're just going to reduce your effectiveness in that regard. And we seem to be really disciplined in that sort of element of it. And I think that's going to be really important, obviously, in a derby where there's more likelihood that you're going to get drawn into, niggly confrontations and, referees and all this sort of nonsense. So I think if Celtic keep their discipline, which I think they will, and they keep their focus, I just think they'll eventually wear them down. And I think that the squad depth now is such that bringing on 5 equal subs to what's going to go off is a game changer, because I think they're quite exposed now in their squad depth. In comparison, I don't think they've got game changers particularly to bring on from the bench, and so it may take a while. Like I said on Saturday when it was 9-0, be patient, because I thought they've picked a team to hunker in, so that was quite funny. But so I'll say the same thing. It might take 75, 80 minutes to win the game, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah, there's loads of interesting things in that I'd love to expand on, but we're 50 minutes into the podcast, so I won't. What I will say is that I'm at least hopeful that Celtic aren't bringing on Nir Beaton to finish out the game, so we will have a bit more of a calm head in Aaron Moy than Nir Beaton. No disrespect to the man, but he wasn't exactly the coolest of cucumbers when it came to the pressure pot of a derby match against Rangers. And I think the point you made about the general experience in this game is going to be an important one. I remember speaking to Darren O'Dea about the game, and he remembers playing in ones, and he said you can't even hear your teammates at times, so you're basically playing off pure instinct. If the Celtic team are playing off more instinct than the Rangers team, I think the almost muscle memory of Celtic's movements and triggers that will be absolutely spot on for this game. So just before we finish up, we've been hoping and praying for a centre defensive midfielder, and it seems like on deadline day Celtic are going to get it, and that is Oliver Albelgard, who's going to come in from Rubin Kazan. It was revealed today by Fabrizio Romano, who else, that this transfer was going to happen, and it seems like I think he's in London at the minute on his way to do his medical, and it will be a signing that Celtic are going to make. It just really hasn't been reported what the fee and what the year of the contract will be, but we'll find that out in the next couple of hours. I'm sure we will. But he is 6'4". He's coming in as a defensive midfielder, and I've read a couple of bits on him, and one thing that was put to me about it, or not put to me, but put to the audience, was that he was putting up sort of Vinicius Souza type style of plays, type number, type sort of demographic, and what type of player we're getting here. So did either of you have a look at him before the show to see what kind of player we're getting here?
I did. But Alan,
go, please.
Who did their homework? Come on, who did their homework?
Right,
I did a little bit, but I know James will have done more. I can guarantee.
Yeah, so I did my old benchmarking exercise that I do, and so I think that the comparison with the say the name Vinicius, was that what his name?
Vinicius Souza, yeah.
Vinicius,
yeah.
That's right.
Souza, yeah.
Souza. I think that he's in that neighborhood. Now, I'll be consistent, meaning that this is not my preference, right? I said that when there was a rumor of Souza. I think this guy's probably a notch down athletically from Souza, which you might expect given the profiles, the ages, and where they're playing and that kind of thing. He looks to be an elite type of aggressor in that position, meaning that his ability to win the ball back and intercept, he seems to be very smart and aggressive positionally. So, this is like pouring gasoline on a fire that's already burning relative to us against, 10 out of 11 domestic opposition, meaning that if you plop him in the middle of midfield, I could see a scenario where the vast majority of the teams that we play domestically will have almost no chance getting out, because he's that good at kind of patrolling that area. And I don't think he has high-end athleticism or pace or even like mid-tier. He's not what you might expect. Like at 6'4" in a defensive midfielder, the likelihood of him having high-end speed just generally is not going to be, that common. Particularly his age and where he's been playing. So if you think about his positives, I would say that's his big positive, meaning that he's going to allow us to just continue the pressure in the attacking half, and it's going to be unrelenting. He's good in the air. Again, not that surprising given his size. It's not always the case when you're taller, but he seems to do a good job in the air. That'll help on set pieces. That'll help, against higher level opposition. I'd say the deficiencies are probably he's very left-footed, it appears, and he's probably maybe I'll call it mediocre on the ball from a passing perspective. He's not going to be Moy playing in that deep role. So he's more in the Scott Brown tradition in that role, which again, some people prefer and like. That's fine. I worry that he's not the type of player that's going to improve our ability to build out from the back. Meaning, I think one of the things that McGregor does in that role is the movement on the ball skills to be able to help us get the ball out against that higher level of pressing. I'm concerned he may not be that. Actually, when I look at him, immediately I go to, actually, he should be our left-sided center back because he's got midfielder skills on the ball. He's very left-footed. He's very good defensively. He's good aerially. So actually, I think he profiles in that regard really well. I doubt that's how we're recruiting him or why. I just worry about his range of passing and his athleticism relative to, again, at the Champions League level or at the late stage Europa League level, whether or not he's that central deep lying midfielder that's going to be able to help us in those facets of play. Maybe his defensive work and ability to put the pressure on in the attacking half is going to overwhelm that and be enough to compensate for it. But it'll be interesting to find out how that kind of plays out. And the other thing is just position, like where I think the other, and I've been probably significantly outside of consensus on this is I don't like McGregor as an 8 in Ange's system at the European level. I think there's too many deficiencies there at this point. And the idea that he's not going to play, I think, is probably silly. So it's, he's probably going to play, and it's either we're going to switch to 2 sitting midfielders with McGregor, 2 left-footed, sitting midfielders with McGregor, or McGregor's going to be an 8, and that's not my. And then you're sitting either O'Reilly or Hatate. So it'll be interesting to see how all this shakes out.
Final word to you, Alan?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, God, I hope we don't turn him into a centre back. Listen, so I've not had a chance to. I've relied on a couple of people on Twitter. I'll be honest to profile him. What it seemed to me was, he's not going to give you a lot in terms of attacking threat, particularly, but a couple of things that stood out. One of his is his aerial ability. The other is he actually can take the ball forward quite well. He's actually, his ball progression with ball at feet is pretty strong, and certainly in the Russian league. So that's an interesting facet. And again, it's just a way of when you're sitting in front of a deep block. If you've got a 6'4" guy who's comfortable charging forward with the ball, that's quite a nice little variation that you can bring to the game. I think it does, for me anyway, it points to a couple of things. One is that it's more likely we're going to play a slightly tweaked system, especially in Europe, where it'll look more like a 4-2-3-1 than the current 4-3-3. And you've got McGregor and Moy that would both be very comfortable and effective sitting in beside somebody of his profile. Clearly, I don't see much future for James McCarthy. That probably goes without saying, given if he's likely to sign. So that's another impact of this. There's a guy I just only started recently following, and I'm so sorry I can't find the tweet, and I can't remember the guy's name because I've only recently followed him. But he's a kind of a journalist, or he's an expert on Russian football. The tweet that I remember from him was to say, Celtic fans, a lot of skepticism around when you signed Starfelt and Haksabanovic even, and I'm going to find his tweet and I'm going to probe him on that and see if he can tell me why. It's very obvious to me why he'd be skeptical about Starfelt, having watched him for a year. But he said, and this is the guy who obviously clearly knows Ruben Kazan inside out, but he said, this fellow here, he said he's Champions League level. So that was take that for what it's worth. This guy's an expert in Russian football. I can't remember his name. When I find it, I'll retweet it, and people who follow me can pick up on it. So I thought that was encouraging. It's just a little snippet. etc. So I don't know. I'll honestly tell you, I'd never heard of the guy until 2 days ago. Never seen him play. But again, we seem to be subjugating poor little Ruben Kazan, who clearly, and absolutely ripping all their best players off them. But again, in the capitalist venal world of professional football, it's smart from Celtic. This is a distressed company, a distressed club. I think the two things are the same. It's a distressed football club. And we're cherry picking their best players for an absolute bargain. So this is very smart, in a very sort of nasty way from Celtic.
Yeah, and I could see someone characterizing him as a Champions League level defensive midfielder in a kind of a traditional defensive midfield role. And I'm not saying it's not the case. It's just I have some concerns about how that translates in Ange's system. And this is the point that Alan made, meaning that if we're going to be tweaking how we're playing, I think that makes a lot more sense. But if we're going to play the way we've been playing and with the way we played last year in Europe, with him as the single sitting defensive midfielder, I have some concerns about transitions and his level of pace. And, he does dive in a lot. So, that's part of the flip side. He's very good at it. But there's a sliding scale of that. I mean, that as he's putting that pressure forward to try and win balls back, if you don't win it back, then all of a sudden you've got your sole central defensive midfielder out of position, exposing two center backs that don't really have great pace either. So, that I'm just saying it's a concern. I'm not saying it's, going to be an issue. It's in looking at him, I could see that being a potential issue. And I'm, always trying to look at the balance here. Overall, he's a really good player. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's again, back to this question of optimization and fit. So he's going to make us better. There's no question. It's just how we're going to play and optimizing him. I think it'll be fascinating.
So sorry, just one last thing. Sorry, so young Patrick Kasky, who's a fan of the Ibrox club, but a lovely kid, and I don't think I'm not kidding. There's not a single player on the planet that kid hasn't scouted. Right, he's just phenomenal, and he actually tweeted, kind of giving it this when the news came that Celtic were going to sign this guy. I think he just shown a piece on the Rangers Review. It's called a publication where he's written a piece about him, saying, despite being generally well-rounded, Abildgaard's greatest strengths are progressing the ball and shuttling around the defensive third, breaking up play. A perfect combination of traits, as they are scalable to the European level and work well. Works well in tandem with what would have been their midfield and so forth. So again,
I think he would be an ideal guy for Rangers' narrow system. Absolutely, like that. There, I don't even think it's a question.
Yeah. Yep. So, again, let's see. I mean, 900 minutes. I always say 900 minutes. Let's see.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. It's certainly a position in Celtic we're looking to strengthen in. So, final day of the transfer window was a good time to do it if you hadn't done it before. I did a little bit of research on him earlier on today. I looked at his Wikipedia page, and this was I'd say 15 minutes after he was linked with Celtic, and somebody had edited it to say that his dad fought in the 3rd Regiment of the Tipperary Army during the War of Independence in Ireland.
Of course.
The Irish links are there. But look, we'll wait and see. That's Oliver Abildgaard, who's joining from Ruben Kazan. Should be announced by the club in the next couple of hours before the transfer window shuts. It shuts really tightly.
It doesn't shut. It slams. And everyone
it only slams. It only slams. But unfortunately, our window on the Huddle Breakdown is going to slam now, because that's all we have time for on this week's show. If you want to support the podcast, there is a link in the description for the One Football app, which you can download, and you can follow along with transfer news until the end of the window when that slams shut at midnight tonight. Or you can get the scores and the predictions and the news, everything you want from Celtic in the One Football app. But make sure to use the link in the description below. Don't go straight to the App Store. Alan, you have your hand up.
I do.
Do you have a
One last thing,
Go
and
for
thank
it.
you to
Go for it.
Rob McEwen in the comments, who said, I suppose Starfelt and him will have a good understanding already. That's an absolutely brilliant point I meant to make, which is that he's played at least 30, maybe more games, Starfelt with Abdelgard. And if you think about it, if you think about Starfelt's weaknesses and Abdelgard's strengths, that's a pretty smart combination, actually, as well. So just throw that out there.
If anybody is familiar with FIFA Ultimate Team, him and Abelgard and Haksabanovic would have about a 70% link because they played for the same club and they have that connection.
No idea what you're talking about.
No, exactly. Younger listeners, if there are any younger listeners of the podcast, they will understand.
I'm a championship manager, boy.
And finally, as well, before we finish up, we're also this year we're sponsored by footballprizes.co.uk. You might have seen us tweeting out a few prizes over the last couple of weeks. This week's prize is a signed Lille Abada shirt, along with other great prizes that are available on the site now. If you want to go on and get your tickets, the draw is always on Tuesday at 7:30. So that's when the draw window slams shut in terms of footballprizes.co.uk. So we'll share that link on our Twitter as well if you want to be in with a chance of winning that Lille Abada shirt and some more prizes as well with footballprizes.co.uk. But that is us done on the Huddle Breakdown this week. Thanks to everyone who watched live and to everyone who is going to listen to the podcast over the couple of days until the derby match. And we'll be back next week, probably with a derby and a Champions League game against Real Madrid to review. I'm not sure what day we're going to be doing it, but
we'll need half a day, I think.
Yeah. We will do an emergency podcast if Celtic beat Real Madrid at home. We will do it immediately after. So I think that's a fair enough promise to make on the channel. But until then, thanks again for watching. Thanks to James and Alan. Thank you. And we will chat to you next week. Good luck.